Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm really glad you're here for week 3 of our emotional self-care course. Whether you're watching this live, catching up later, or coming back to it after a hard day, your being here matters. This work meets you exactly where you are. This week, we're entering layer 3, internal regulation. In week 1, we built a map. We talked about emotions as signals, often amplified by addiction, illness, and long-standing stress patterns. We reframed emotional intensity as something meaningful and informative. In week 2, we practiced awareness, noticing emotions, body sensations, thoughts, and internal reactions as they arise without immediately responding. Many of you noticed that awareness alone created space. That's not accidental. Awareness changes brain timing. It gives the nervous system a pause. And now in week 3, we build on that pause. This is the week where emotional self-care becomes stabilizing. We're focusing on what to do when emotions intensify, when activation rises, urgency kicks in, and the pull toward old patterns, including cravings, gets stronger. This week is about building capacity. It's about learning how to stay with intensity as it rises. It's about responding in ways that support steadiness rather than escalation. It's about learning how to stay present and responsive as intensity rises, so emotions can move through without taking over. This layer is especially important in recovery because emotional activation is one of the strongest drivers of craving and relapse. This happens because of how the brain and the nervous system respond under stress. Today, we'll talk about what's happening in the brain and nervous system during emotional escalation, why regulation becomes the turning point, how compassionate internal responses interrupt craving pathways, what it feels like when regulation capacity grows, and how this supports both emotional steadiness and physical healing. We'll move slowly. You can pause anytime. If something stirs inside, that's okay. That's part of the work doing its job. Let's start with the science because understanding what's happening in your brain and body changes everything about how you relate to emotional intensity. In addiction, whether to substances or highly processed foods, we see very consistent patterns in the brain. One of the most well-replicated findings in neuroscience is amygdala hyperreactivity. The amygdala is not the fear center, despite how that's often described. It's better understood as an importance detector. It scans for anything emotionally relevant, threats, rewards, social cues, and it reacts fast. In addiction, the amygdala becomes more reactive and more easily triggered. Everyday stressors like conflict, uncertainty, fatigue, or even disappointment register as urgent. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, which helps with perspective, inhibition, and context, is often less effective during emotional activation. This reflects how prolonged stress affects brain function. Chronic stress hormones like cortisol reduce prefrontal efficiency over time. So, what happens? Emotion rises fast, perspective drops, urgency takes over. The insula plays a major role here too. The insula integrates internal body sensations like heart rate, gut signals, and temperature with emotional meaning. In addiction, the insula becomes hypersensitive. That means normal body signals, low energy, tension, adrenaline, are interpreted as intolerable. This is where cravings come in. Cravings are not just wanting, they are interoceptive alarms. The brain says something is wrong inside the body. Act now. Processed foods intensify this loop by destabilizing blood glucose, increasing adrenaline, and overstimulating reward circuits. Add chronic illness to the mix, ongoing inflammation, pain, fatigue, and the nervous system stays on high alert. This is why emotional self care and recovery cannot be purely cognitive. The body is involved, the nervous system is involved, biochemistry is involved. Here's the hopeful part. Research consistently shows that emotion regulation practices strengthen connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. Over time, the brain becomes better at responding rather than reacting. Parasympathetic activity increases, heart rate variability improves, stress hormones decrease, inflammatory markers drop. These changes show up in the body and brain. They directly support remission in chronic illness and stability in recovery. Regulation changes the terrain your emotions move through. Regulation works through two main pathways, top down and bottom up. Top down regulation involves the prefrontal cortex. This is where perspective, meaning making, and gentle inhibition come from. Bottom up regulation works through the body, breath, posture, sensation, movement, and influences the brain through the vagus nerve. Parts work naturally bridges these pathways. When you recognize a part of me is activated right now, you are doing something neurologically powerful. You're creating psychological distance, which re-engages prefrontal circuits. You're reducing threat, which calms the amygdala. And you're opening space for choice. Self-presence, the calm, steady awareness that can observe without panic, signals safety to the nervous system. And safety changes everything. When the nervous system senses safety, cortisol decreases, oxytocin increases, vagal tone improves, emotional intensity becomes more tolerable. This is why compassion plays a central role in regulation. It directly supports how the brain and nervous system settle. Early intervention is key. Once emotional activation reaches a certain threshold, the prefrontal cortex goes offline. Regulation is most effective when you catch the rise, not the peak. That's what we're training here. Earlier noticing, gentler response, faster recovery. Before emotions ever feel overwhelming, they usually begin in quieter ways. Most often, the first changes happen in the body. You might notice your heart beating faster than it was a minute ago. Your breathing may get a little shorter or more shallow. Muscles that were relaxed start to tighten, especially in the shoulders, jaw, or chest. Some people feel warmth or pressure in the chest. Others notice a clench or drop in the stomach. These changes can be subtle, but they're meaningful. They're often the first signs that your body is reacting to something. As the body shifts, your thoughts often change too. You may notice your attention getting stuck on one thing, a situation, a conversation, or a feeling keeps pulling your focus back. You might replay what just happened or imagine what could happen next. It becomes harder to think about anything else. At the same time, there's often a sense of urgency. Waiting feels uncomfortable. Sitting with what's happening feels hard. There's pressure to do something that will change the feeling quickly. This is where familiar thoughts can show up, like, I can't handle this, or I need relief right now. These thoughts aren't random. They're part of how the brain tries to reduce discomfort as fast as possible. Inside, you may also notice a pull toward familiar responses. There can be pressure to fix the situation, distract yourself, shut the feeling down, or soothe it in ways you've used before. Cravings often begin here as part of that pull toward relief. All of this is information. These early signs tell you that activation is rising and your body is asking for support. When you notice these signals early, even if you notice them after they've already started, you create a little space. That space gives you time to respond instead of reacting automatically. That time makes regulation possible. As emotional intensity builds, many people notice familiar pressures show up. There may be a strong pull toward food, even if eating wasn't on your mind earlier. You might hear a critical inner voice getting louder. You might feel an urge to shut down, stay busy, scroll, distract, or get away from whatever you're feeling. Sometimes there's a surge of defiant energy that says, I don't care, and wants to do something, anything that cuts through the discomfort. These urges tend to arrive quickly. They show up because your body wants the discomfort to stop. The brain is scanning for whatever has worked before to bring relief, and it moves toward that automatically. What matters in these moments is what you do once you notice the urge is there. Many people respond by tightening up inside, arguing with the urge, feeling frustrated with themselves, or trying to force it away. And when that happens, the body often stays tense. Stress chemistry remains elevated, and the sense of urgency can increase. A different response begins with simple noticing. You might notice there's a strong pull to eat right now, or there's a lot of pressure to make this feeling go away. You're just registering what's happening. That kind of noticing changes the timing in the brain. It keeps the thinking parts of the brain involved instead of handing everything over to urgency. From there, curiosity can open a little space. You might wonder what feels most uncomfortable in your body right now, or what feels hardest to sit with in this moment. You don't need a clear answer. The act of wondering itself slows the stress response. As you stay present, feeling the urge without acting on it, noticing the pressure without immediately responding, the body has a new experience. Here's where the science matters. Each time an urge rises and passes without being acted on, the brain updates its wiring. Neural pathways that were repeatedly used, emotion, leading to urge, leading to action, begin to weaken through a process called pruning. And at the same time, new pathways begin to strengthen. Emotion leading to noticing, leading to staying present, leading to settling. This is called synaptic sprouting. This is how change actually happens through repeated lived experience. Over time, as these new pathways strengthen, the same urges tend to lose intensity. They may still appear, but they don't hold that same pull or they don't last as long. The body learns at a biological level that it can move through discomfort without immediate escape. That learning makes regulation easier because the nervous system has more than one well worn path to follow. As regulation begins to take hold, people often notice a shift in what they're aware of. When the pressure to act eases even a little, different emotions can come into view. These are often emotions that were pushed aside for a long time because they felt too hard to sit with. Grief from earlier losses, fear that never had words, sadness that lingered under the surface, or a sense of being alone during moments that felt overwhelming. For many people living with addiction, these emotions were managed indirectly. Food helped take the edge off. It helped interrupt the feeling or dull it enough to get through the moment. From a brain perspective, that made sense. Eating reliably activated reward and calming pathways, even if only briefly. And the brain learned to use that shortcut whenever emotional discomfort appeared. What it didn't provide was a lasting sense of safety. Those emotions were paused, not processed. When you stay present now, something different happens in the brain and body. When an emotion is met with steady attention without rushing to change it, the nervous system shifts. Activity increases in areas of the brain involved in regulation and integration, including the prefrontal cortex and the networks that support social safety. At the same time, stress responses driven by the amygdala begin to ease. This allows emotional processing to complete. Instead of being interrupted or pushed away, the emotion is felt, registered, and allowed to move through. Physiologically, that often looks like a deeper breath arriving on its own, muscles loosening, or the body settling into a slower rhythm. You may notice tears, a long exhale, warmth in the chest, or a gentle shaking or trembling. These are common signs that stored stress is releasing. The nervous system is finishing a response that was left unfinished before. As this happens, the overall load inside the body decreases. When painful emotions receive attention and support, the drive to escape them weakens. The body no longer has to work as hard to shut the feeling down. As a result, the pull toward food or other familiar coping patterns often becomes quieter. There is simply less urgency behind it. This shift isn't created through effort or discipline. It comes from relief. Over time, as these experiences repeat, the brain learns a new association. Emotional pain can be met directly and survived. That learning reduces the need for protective urgency and makes regulation feel more accessible. This kind of healing unfolds gradually. It shows up in small moments where feelings are allowed instead of interrupted, and where the body learns through experience that it can move through emotion without being overwhelmed. That's what gives this work its staying power. Let's talk about cravings directly, because this is where many people start to notice real practical change. Cravings develop through repetition. Over time, the brain learns that certain internal states, stress, sadness, agitation, fatigue, are followed by eating, and that eating brings a temporary shift in how the body feels. Blood glucose rises, dopamine is released, tension eases for a moment. The brain stores that sequence. So later, when emotional discomfort shows up, the brain doesn't wait to analyze it. It moves straight toward the learned response. The urge to eat isn't random. It's the brain replaying a pathway that once brought relief. What regulation does is change what happens in the middle of that learned sequence. When you stay present during emotional activation, when you feel the urge without immediately acting on it, the experience unfolds differently. Instead of continuing to build, the urge follows a more natural course. It rises, it reaches a high point, and then it begins to settle. That settling is important. Each time an urge rises and then passes without being followed by relief through food, the brain updates its expectations. The pathway that linked discomfort to immediate eating loses strength. This happens in the brain's reward circuitry, including areas like the nucleus accumbens that are involved in learning what to seek and repeat. At the same time, another pathway is being strengthened. The brain is learning that staying present, breathing, and allowing the feeling to move through can also lead to relief. That learning comes from experience, not effort. It's about giving the brain new information through experience. As these moments repeat, the pull of cravings often changes. They may still show up, but they tend to peak more quickly and settle sooner. The sense of urgency loses some of its grip. There's also a body level shift happening alongside this. When stress hormones stay elevated, the body remains in survival mode. When regulation helps those stress responses settle, inflammation can begin to decrease. The body has more opportunity to repair, restore, and stabilize. That's why regulation supports remission in such a direct way. It changes the conditions inside the body that allow healing to happen. And over time, this creates a different relationship with urges. Instead of feeling trapped in a loop, there's more room, more choice, and more steadiness. That's the pathway we're interrupting here, and the one we're rebuilding. As you work with regulation this week, a few things tend to show up for people, and it can really help to know what you're noticing isn't random. One of the first things people often mention is that emotions feel more noticeable for a while. Not necessarily more dramatic, just more there. You might be more aware of tightness in your chest, heaviness in your stomach, or the emotional tone of a moment that you would have skimmed past before. That's usually a sign that you're staying present instead of stepping away automatically. When you're here for the feeling, you actually feel it. And that can take some getting used to. Cravings often change too. Instead of hanging around for a long time, they may rise clearly, hit a peak, and then pass. The urge can still feel strong in the moment, but the arc is different. It moves. And that movement matters because it tells us the brain is learning a new ending to a familiar pattern. And that movement matters because it tells us the brain is learning a new ending to a familiar pattern. After an emotional wave passes, many people notice their body settling on its own. Breathing deepens, shoulders drop, the jaw unclenches. There's often a quiet moment afterward, not empty, just calmer. That's the nervous system finishing a stress response and returning toward balance. You might also notice emotions coming up that you didn't expect: sadness, grief, a sense of vulnerability, tears that arrive without a clear story attached. These moments often happen because there's finally enough space and safety for those feelings to be felt instead of managed. All of this takes energy. So it's very common to need more rest during this week. You might feel a little more tired, want more quiet, or notice that your body asks you to slow down. That's part of integration. Your nervous system is reorganizing itself, and that work isn't passive. A helpful way to support yourself is to build in very small pauses during the day. When you notice an emotional rise or a craving, try stopping for just a moment. Let your body settle where it is. Feel your feet on the floor or the chair supporting you. Notice your breath the way you would notice the weather. No fixing, no adjusting. And then quietly name what's happening in simple language. There's a lot of pressure right now. This feels intense in my body. Stay with that for a few breaths. Notice what changes, even slightly. Maybe the urge shifts. Maybe the body softens a bit. Maybe nothing changes and you stay anyway. Those brief moments matter more than they seem. They're how regulation gets practiced in real life. Everything you're noticing this week, the emotions, the cravings, the settling, the tiredness, it all fits with a nervous system that's learning a new rhythm. That learning doesn't happen all at once. It happens in these small, ordinary moments where you stay present a little longer than before. That's how this work takes root. As we close out week 3, I want to take some time to pull together what we've been working on, because this week sits right at the center of emotional self care. This week has been about what happens when emotions rise in real time while activation is happening in the body. We focused on learning how to stay present when intensity shows up instead of immediately moving toward escape or shutdown. Earlier in the course, we talked about awareness, noticing what's happening inside. This week, we took the next step. We looked at what it means to stay without awareness long enough for the nervous system to respond differently. When you stay present during emotional intensity, several things happen at once. The parts of the brain involved in perspective, context, and choice remain available. The nervous system doesn't escalate as quickly or swing as dramatically from one state to another. And the patterns that link emotional discomfort to urgency, including cravings, begin to change. This matters because cravings don't exist in isolation. They're tied to how the body experiences stress and emotional activation. As regulation improves, the intensity and urgency behind cravings often change as well. The body has more room to settle before it reaches for relief. And over time, this builds internal trust through bodily learning. Your system begins to recognize through experience that strong emotions can rise and fall without taking control. That learning happens through repetition. Each time you notice intensity, stay present for a moment longer and allow it to move through. The nervous system updates its expectations. That's why this work is practice based. It's built through real moments, noticing pressure, feeling discomfort, staying with it briefly, and letting it shift. Those moments add up. Some days this will feel more accessible than others. Some moments will be short, some will be messy. What matters is returning to the process when you can, noticing what's happening, offering a measured, kind response, giving the body time to settle before moving on. As we move into next week, we'll expand this work into relationships. We'll look at how emotional activation shows up in interactions with other people and how to stay grounded while staying connected at the same time. For now, take a moment to pause with this week. You've been training your nervous system in a new way of responding. That learning is happening at a physical level through repeated experience. Thank you for being here and for staying engaged with this work. I'll see you next week.